Good evening, I'm David Kramer with the National Weather Service and Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. Get any updates to our forecast, check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the warnings and advisories that we have out for the state. In the Panhandle area, especially those northern locations, we have several winter storm warnings out. Primarily, those will expire at 6 p.m. this evening, so pretty soon here. But up by the Haines and Skagway area, those are going to be out until 9 p.m. this evening. And these are all for snow and strong winds through the area. A little bit further to the south, winter weather advisory out for snow for the Hyder area, and that's going to be out until 6 p.m. this evening as well. Moving up to the north, we'll start off along the west coast. We do have wind chill advisories all along the west coast. The more southern locations going into the Seward Peninsula and YK Delta area are going to be out until midnight tonight. That is Thursday night. And then as we move up into the southern part of the Brooks Range, we're going to see those out until noon on Friday, also for wind chill advisories there. And then up north in the northeastern part of the Brooks Range, we have a wind chill warning with wind chills getting down to as low as -70, and that is going to be out until 6 p.m. on Friday. Should also be of note that in AKwx Pass there is a chance for some blowing snow conditions to arise from some winds moving through the pass. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we can see one low pressure system coming in from the far western part of the Bering Sea, bringing in some areas of cloud cover and snow showers to much of the western and central part of the Bering Sea. As we watch again, we can see some more clouds from another system coming up towards the western Aleutian Islands. Not quite here yet, well off to the south and west for now. Looking out over mainland part of the state, we have a low that is in the northern part of the Gulf, bringing in some showers. So you can see this whole band of showers headed towards southeast Alaska, and some cloud cover bringing in some of that heavier snow already there. And then one more time we'll look out, we can see a band of cloud cover out over much of the interior part of the state, and that's leading us to this area of snow showers that we have extending from the northeastern part up by AKwx down through the Brooks Range, down by the Galena area, and all the way south into the Bristol Bay area, bringing some snow cover to those locations. Along the west coast, we do have some areas of blowing snow that's picking up snow on the ground, resuspending it with some of the stronger winds, creating some blowing snow conditions along the YK Delta coastline up through St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait area, up as far north as the Point Hope, Point Lay areas. We have our main low pressure system out in the northern part of the Gulf, bringing snow to areas all along the North Gulf Coast, including Prince William Sound and down by Kodiak Island as well. And then we do have that snow coming into places of the Panhandle, but some of that warmer air coming up from the south, transitioning some of that snow over to rain, especially for areas right by the water or by the Gulf Coast. However, higher elevations and places further to the north are going to primarily be snow. As we look out far out over the Bering Sea, we have our other low pressure coming in from the west, bringing snow to the central western parts of the Bering, down into the Aleutians as well, expecting that snow to extend out into the Alaska Peninsula. For tonight, that low not moving a whole lot, kind of just spinning out there and the northwestern part of the Bering Sea, bringing snow to many of those same locations down into the Aleutians as well. However, that next system coming up, starting to bring a little bit warmer air, transitioning some of that snow over to rain for the western Aleutian Islands. As we move up along the west coast, we'll see continued blowing snow conditions along areas around the Seward Peninsula, primarily out through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area, down to those northern places of the YK Delta coast. In the western parts of the interior, we're going to continue to see snow extending up through the Brooks Range and along much of the central and eastern part of the Arctic coastline. Down in south central Alaska, low pressure continuing out over the northern Gulf, bringing snow from Kodiak Island through the Kenai Peninsula and all along the North Gulf Coast into southeast Alaska as well. Still seeing some of that warmer air, transitioning some of the snow at lower elevations and by the Gulf over to rain, but those more northern locations going to continue to be primarily snow through the night. As we move into Friday, pretty similar situation down south where we do have a new low coming in. We are still going to see a similar pattern of the snow further to the north with a mixture of rain as we get closer towards the water and further to the south and by the Gulf Coast. Our low sitting out over the northern Gulf, continuing to bring snow all along the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, down into Kodiak Island as well, protecting much of the Cook Inlet area from a lot of the snow with the Kenai Mountains and Chugach Range there. Along the east coast of the state, going to continue to see some snow showers, but much of the central and western parts of the interior are starting to dry out, and that's due in part to this high pressure starting to build in along the west coast, also cutting off a lot of those blowing snow conditions that we've had for the remainder of this evening into tonight. We have our low pressure continuing to sit out over the northern part of the Bering Sea, bringing snow to the central Bering down into the eastern Aleutian Islands, all the way through the rest of the Aleutian Islands, with another chunk of warm air coming up towards the western Aleutians, not quite transitioning over for much of Friday over to rain, expecting to see primarily snow. Then as we move into Saturday, that system really starting to push in towards the Aleutians, bringing up a strong fetch of warmer air, transitioning over to rain for much of the central Aleutian Islands, out by the western and eastern Aleutians as well, a mixture of rain and snow, and pushing that line up closer and closer towards the Pribilof Islands. Still, however, expected to remain snow in the Pribilofs for Saturday. Along the west coast, we're going to see some showers developing, especially out by the St. Lawrence Island area, and then down by the Alaska Peninsula as well, with the strongest amount of those showers on the Pacific side, with that southerly flow pushing up against the islands and the peninsula. Then out over mainland Alaska, we do have high pressure dominating much of the area, keeping most of the precipitation pretty light, with some lighter showers up in the upper Yukon Valley, extending up to the eastern part of the Arctic coast. Down in south central Alaska, seeing some snow in Prince William Sound area and down in the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula. Then our low finally pushing off a little bit to the east, bringing some more snow to central and northern locations of the Panhandle. Still some warm air lingering for the very southern locations of the Panhandle. A mixture of snow and rain is expected there. For our temperatures starting Friday morning, we do have temps dropping just below freezing for much of the Panhandle area, with the exception of way further to the south and right along the coast by Sitka, staying just above freezing. Out over south central Alaska, you can see this little warmer area of warm pocket hugged by the Alaska Range, going to stay above zero for most locations. The exception is in the Copper River Basin, where Glen Allen is expected to drop to -9, and the -20s for much of the interior out towards the west coast as well, and then right around -30 all along the Arctic coastline. A little bit warmer as we drop down to some of these places along the coast for the YK Delta, and -teens there. And then all along the Aleutian Islands, dropping down below freezing for the most part, a little bit colder by the Alaska Peninsula, and we do have ADAC trying to stay above freezing at 34 degrees. As we move into the afternoon, getting into the mid-30s all through the Aleutian Islands, staying colder as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, and staying below zero for the Bristol Bay area and the YK Delta area. -teens all the way up the coastline, -20s along the Arctic coast, and then into the -teens to lower -20s for the interior part of the state. Staying in single digits for more interior locations of south central, getting into teens for many other locations, warmer along the coast, and then into the mid-30s for Friday afternoon highs for much of the southeastern part of the state. Saturday morning, we are going to drop back down to freezing or just below for much of the Panhandle, dropping into the negative numbers for much of south central, a little bit warmer for the Prince William Sound area, dropping down into the -30s for much of the interior, and right around -30 for much of the Arctic coastline. Some places staying a little bit warmer in the -20s. -20s along much of the west coast, a little bit warmer by the water's edge, dropping down into the teens for the peninsula and into the 30s for the Aleutians, getting up into around 40 degrees for the Aleutians Saturday afternoon, right around zero for much of southwest part of the state, staying in the -20s for much of the interior and Arctic coastline, and then into the positive single digits for south central and above freezing for the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a quick look at our flying weather. Out over the central part of the Bering Sea, we have some MVFR and IFR conditions. We do have MVFR conditions near or around the Aleutian Islands and into the Alaska Peninsula. And then up through kind of the western portion of the state, not to include the west coast, we do have MVFR and IFR conditions extending up from southwest Alaska all the way up to the Arctic coastline. Down in south central Alaska along the North Gulf Coast, we have a lot of MVFR conditions, and then more IFR as we get closer towards Cordova and out through Yakutat area. In the Panhandle, starting off VFR in the morning, with the exception of places down to the south where we do have some MVFR and IFR conditions. Then as we move into the afternoon, the conditions in the south will clear up to VFR, but areas further to the north will have some MVFR conditions that will be along the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound and down by Kodiak Island area as well. Much of the interior part of the state is going to have MVFR and IFR conditions extending up through the Brooks Range and along the north slope coastline. Down the west coast of the state, primarily VFR conditions through the Bristol Bay area, but as we get out into the Bering and Aleutians, MVFR and IFR conditions are expected. Moving into Saturday morning, continuing to see MVFR and IFR conditions throughout the Bering and Aleutian Islands into the Alaska Peninsula as well. Much of the west coast still going to be VFR with the exception of up by the Norton Sound area, out by the Bering Strait. We are going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions there. Along the Arctic coastline, MVFR, IFR conditions through the interior part of the state. The area that was a little bit further to the west is now pushed off to the central and eastern portions of the interior, and that's going to extend down into northern portions of south central Alaska. And also around Prince William Sound, we're going to see some MVFR conditions Saturday morning. VFR expected for the Panhandle. Moving into Saturday afternoon, MVFR conditions moving back into the Panhandle area. VFR along much of the North Gulf Coast, and for eastern portions of the interior extending up into the Brooks Range, MVFR and IFR conditions expected. Down the west coast, we're going to have more lower conditions moving in for the Seward Peninsula area, YK Delta, and then for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread MVFR and IFR conditions. For the passes starting up north, AKwx Pass should be IFR throughout the day, as well as Adigan Pass. Down in the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill should both be MVFR through the day, as well as Rainy Pass and Windy Pass, with some areas further to the north expecting to see some IFR conditions. Then on Friday for Isabel Pass, starting off VFR, dropping down to marginal conditions later in the day. Mentasta, however, will be VFR throughout the day. Tenuta Pass expecting to be marginal, as well as Portage. And then out by Chilkoot and White expected to start off VFR in the morning and then transitioning pretty quickly over to MVFR conditions. For our freezing line, we'd still have some warmer air pushing up towards the Panhandle area, with our surface freezing line moving through the Panhandle out along the North Gulf Coast and then dipping back through the central part of the Gulf of Alaska, coming back across the Aleutians by the eastern Aleutian Islands and then staying in the southern Bering Sea out until the western Aleutians. For our icing, we do have some areas between 5,000 and 10,000 feet extending from the western Aleutian Islands into the eastern Aleutian Islands. As we move a little bit north into the Pribilof Islands area, below 5,000 feet is expected there. Then out over mainland Alaska, not much up north, but as we get into south central Alaska, between 3,000 and 8,000 feet, extending down into the Panhandle, between 3,000 and 8,000 feet expected there as well. For our jet stream, a primary portion of the jet staying to our south, but just to the south of the Panhandle, we are going to see that 170 knot jet dropping down to 150 as it pushes off to the east. Out over mainland part of the state, not a lot this high up, but as we get out by the Aleutian Islands, we are going to see a westerly component of the jet moving across the islands around 90 knots there. Taking us to our 9,000 foot winds, we do have primarily westerly flow for southern portions of the Bering Sea, 30 to 40 knots expected there, dropping down to 25 as we get to the southern side of the Aleutian Islands. Out over the west coast of the state, primarily northwesterly direction, 30 to 40 knots, getting up as high as 50 knots as we get by Bristol Bay area and Alaska Peninsula. Out over the state, several low pressure systems causing a little bit of chaotic flow, moving around our one low up to the north, 15 to 20 knots, getting as high as 25 knots out of southerly direction on the eastern side of the low. And then 15 knots over south central Alaska, picking up as we get into the parts of the Gulf, 30 to 50 knots out of a westerly direction, and then wrapping back around that low pressure system. Southwesterly flow over the Panhandle area, 30 to 35 knots, getting higher, closer to 55 as we move further to the south. Then at 3,000 feet, we do have primarily southwesterly flow over the Panhandle area, primarily around 15 knots as we get into the inside waters, but out by the Gulf a little bit stronger there, 25 to 35 knots. Out over much of the interior, pretty low, 5 to 15 knots there. Then out over the west coast, 15 to as high as 45 knots by Bristol Bay. Westerly flow, 20 to 30 knots out over the Aleutians. And we have turbulence out over the west coast of the state, below 4,000 feet, below 3,000 over the Aleutians, and below 5,000 over the Panhandle.
The winter always brings the return of one of the true wonders of the universe, the Orion Nebula. So look southeast any night this week at around 7:30 p.m. and you're going to see a constellation which is loaded with bright stars, Orion the Hunter. The best way to find him is look for his belt of 3 stars in a row. But have you ever looked at Orion for a while and noticed these 3 much dimmer stars that form the Sword of Orion? Because right there, that is the Orion Nebula, a great cosmic cloud where new stars are born. Imagine those stars flaming into existence there, right now. You can find 4 of them called the trapezium with a really small telescope. The Orion Nebula is gigantic, spanning over 30 light years in diameter, and there is enough material there to produce over 10,000 stars the size of our sun that'll go on to live for billions of years and maybe even spawn their own planets that will look back at us while we keep looking up.
Hello, I'm a GOES-R series weather satellite orbiting 22,000 miles above Earth. I can see a lot of cool stuff from up here, and I take pictures of it with my spiffy camera that has 16 different settings. I have such good eyesight, I can see clouds, snow, smoke, smog, and ash, so I can warn you about dangerous conditions and help you avoid them. When storms are brewing, I watch them closely and help with hurricane, tornado, and flood warnings to help keep you safe. And my lightning mapper tracks lightning strikes way up in the sky, even through dark, dense clouds. I also help with search and rescue missions. I listen for distress signals from emergency beacons and tell search and rescue teams just where to find people who need help. But even when I'm keeping a close eye on Earth, I'm monitoring weather out here in space, too. I watch the sun for big bursts of energy, which send waves of radiation toward Earth that can affect power grids, block communication with planes, cause errors in GPS, and damage satellites. Space weather is also very dangerous for astronauts working outside the International Space Station. I warn them so they can get inside where they'll be safe. So the next time you watch a weather report or check your phone for the forecast, remember, that's me. So look to the sky and wave. I'll be here. Whoa! Things are looking pretty bad down there. But don't worry. I'm going to give weather forecasters a heads up and help you stay safe. I'm a GOES-R series weather satellite, and one of my jobs is to keep an eye on Earth's weather as I orbit above. But I'm 22,000 miles above Earth. How does your local weather forecaster know what I see all the way up here? First, I have to figure out what's going on. I point my special camera at the Earth and take pictures of the clouds I see below. My pictures show where the clouds are, but I also take lots of other notes about the clouds. For example, how high they reach into the atmosphere, how much rain they might cause, and when a severe storm may be forming. But I can't keep all of this information to myself. I have to share it with weather forecasters down on Earth. A big antenna is waiting for my call. Since I'm a satellite, I send my pictures and notes in a computer language of ones and zeros. Luckily, the antenna speaks my language. Computers connected to the antenna organize my notes and combine all of the pictures and cloud information and translate them into weather maps. They send a version of the maps back up to me. I'll hold on to these for later. Another copy of the maps is split into smaller pieces. This helps the maps move faster from one place to another. The map pieces are then sent for processing before being sent back up in the sky to a communication satellite. From there, the maps are picked up by antennas at the National Weather Service forecast offices in each region. There are more than 100 offices. I also take the maps that I received and send them out to companies that specialize in making the maps more colorful and better for viewing on TVs and computers. The colorful maps and the maps from the forecast offices then go to your local weather forecaster. The forecaster combines the information from these maps with lots of other information, like model forecast data and radar data, to make predictions about the upcoming weather in your area. And that's how I help you find out if bad weather is going to ruin your afternoon plans. You're welcome. Soon it will be my time to shine in outer space. I'm the GOES-R satellite. That stands for Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite. And the R stands for my order in this series of weather satellites. Like my older siblings before me, I'll do a lot for watching weather, but I'm pretty special because I have a lot of new gadgets. I'm originally from Colorado, but my journey to space has a few stops along the way. I'll be shipped in a very special satellite shipping container to Kennedy Space Center. Moving me around is not easy. I'm over 18 feet wide and weigh 6,000 pounds. And then things get really exciting. I get loaded onto an Atlas V541 launch vehicle. A big rocket! Woo! After Atlas and I blast off together, my compartment separates from the launch vehicle and I continue to climb higher and higher. Then I break away completely and unfurl my solar panel and antenna. After that, I have to use my thrusters to get into just the right position, 22,000 miles above the ground and traveling 1.9 miles per second to keep up with Earth's rotation. And then I can officially start my job along with my fellow GOES sisters, where I take advanced pictures for more accurate weather forecasts, map lightning in real time, and improve the monitoring of the sun's activity. It's going to be so awesome! I can't wait!
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. The ice edge now has moved past St. Matthew Island. However, through the weekend, we do expect some of the southerly flow to come up and compact some of the strips of ice out ahead of the main pack into the pack of ice. And then next week, we expect some more expansion further to the south. This is especially true for areas west of St. Matthew Island, where the advancement should be a little bit more intense. And then we do have some lingering ice that is coming out of Kamishak Bay, moving down into the northern parts of Shelikof Strait. Taking a look now at the main part of our marine forecast for southeast Alaska, we do have in the inside waters some southerly flow, 15 to 20 knots. As we get further to the north, becoming a little bit more southeasterly and gusting up to as high as 35 knots. Seas in the inside waters around 4 feet. Then out over the Gulf, we have southwesterly flow, 20 to 25 knots with seas around 15 to 16 feet. For Saturday, primarily northerly flow in the inside waters, 15 to 25 knots with the strongest up further to the north in Lynn Canal area. And then as we move out over the Gulf waters, primarily westerly flow, 15 to 25 knots. 25 knots is more prevalent further to the south and becoming northeasterly up by Yakutat around 15 knots there. Out over south central Alaska, starting off in the Cook Inlet area, northerly flow 10 to 25 knots, stronger as we get further to the south. Then as we get out west of the Barren Islands, out of Kamishak Bay, we do have winds up to as high as 50 knots and seas as high as 17 feet. Dropping down just slightly to the east of the Barren Islands, 45 knots there, seas 12 feet. And then we have a southerly or northerly wind for much of the North Gulf and into Prince William Sound, 20 to 25 knots. Then on Saturday, northwesterly flow around Prince William Sound, northern part of the Gulf, 30 to 40 knots. And then northwesterly flow around the Barren Islands, 40 to 45 knots, seas as high as 14 feet, highest east of the Barren Islands. Up in Cook Inlet, northeasterly flow 10 to 20 knots, with seas as high as 4 feet in the areas that are not ice covered right now. For the Alaska Peninsula at Kodiak Island on Friday, northwesterly flow around the peninsula, 20 to 25 knots on the Bering side, getting higher on the Pacific side, 35 to 40 knots, and flow around Kodiak Island out of a west to northwest direction, 35 to 40 knots there, seas 10 feet through Shelikof Strait. Then on Saturday, continuing with the primarily westerly flow, 30 to 40 knots, strongest now on the east side of the island, and then flow becoming more southerly as we get closer towards the Alaska Peninsula, 30 knots on the Pacific side, 20 to 25 knots on the Bering side. Then out over the Aleutian Islands, starting way out west by the western Aleutians, easterly wind 30 knots there, seas around 6 feet, switching to become a westerly wind 20 to 25 knots as we move into the central Aleutian Islands, and maintaining much of that westerly flow for most locations around 25 knots. However, north of the eastern Aleutian Islands, easterly flow 25 knots there. As we move into Saturday, winds picking up quite a bit, becoming a little bit more southerly, 40 to as high as 50 knots for the eastern Aleutians, strongest on the Pacific side with that system coming up from the south. And then we do have those 50-knot winds continuing for the central Aleutian Islands out, approaching the western Aleutian Islands as well, coming a little bit more northerly as we get out by the Shemya area. For Friday, along the west coast of the state, primarily a northerly flow, 10 to 20 knots for the most part, stronger as we get further to the south, south of Macquarie Island, out by St. Matthew Island, and down by the Pribilof Islands, all around 25 knots for those locations. Then on Saturday, flow out of Norton Sound around 20 knots out of an easterly direction, becoming northerly by St. Lawrence Island, 25 knots there, switching and become more easterly as we get closer to Nunavik Island, around 25 knots. Then out by St. Matthew, a little bit stronger, northeasterly 30 knots for the island. And then out by the west coast of the state, up on the Arctic coastline, northerly winds 15 to 20 knots, dropping down as we get up along the Arctic coast, 5 to 10 knots there. A little bit stronger by Kaktovik, westerly wind 15 knots is expected. Then on Saturday, continuing the westerly flow along the Arctic coast, 15 to 20 knots, dropping down to 10 knots for the northwestern locations, and then picking up and becoming more northerly as we get by the Bering Strait, up to as high as 25 knots. Quick recap for tonight's weather. We do have low pressure out over the northern part of the Bering Sea, bringing snow to much of the central and western part of the Bering, down into the Aleutian Islands as well. Little tongue of warmer air sticking in over the western part of the Aleutians, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the islands. Then out over mainland Alaska, we do have some areas of blowing snow continuing from the Point Hope area down through the Bering Strait to northern locations of the YK Delta. We also have wind chills along the west coast of the state, and that's going to extend into parts of the Brooks Range, northern part of the interior as well, with the coldest wind chills up in the northeastern part of the Brooks Range, with a wind chill warning in effect, and that is going to be down to as low as minus 70 degrees. And some areas of blowing snow through the pass as well. Down in south central Alaska, low pressure out of the northern part of the Gulf, bringing snow to Kodiak Island, eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula through Prince William Sound area, down into southeast part of the state as well, with some snow mixing with rain as we get further to the south. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.